Good evening, friends. Tonight we'll drift into a slow and gentle journey through Norse myths and ancient legends. Dim your lights, settle under your blanket. Let the noise of the day fade away, and if this calm journey helps you relax, feel free to tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is in your city right now. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin. You find yourself walking through the quiet halls of Asgard in the early morning hours, when the mist still clings to the golden walls, and the air smells of pine and distant rain. The gods are mostly still sleeping, their halls silent, except for the gentle creak of settling timber and the soft whisper of wind through the eaves. But there's one place where a warm golden light spills from beneath a door, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the gentle sound of someone humming a tune as old as the mountains themselves. This is Freyja's chamber, and she's awake early, as she often is, tending to something precious. You peek through the slightly open door, and see her sitting at a simple wooden table, polishing something that catches the light like captured sunlight. It's her golden necklace, the one that seems to hold all the warmth of summer within its gleaming links. She handles it with the care you might use to hold a sleeping bird, her fingers moving slowly and deliberately as she works. The necklace isn't just any piece of jewelry, you realize as you watch her. Each link seems to have been crafted with impossible skill, so fine that they look almost like drops of liquid gold that have somehow decided to hold their shape. When Freyja lifts it to catch the morning light, the metal seems to glow from within, as if it remembers being forged in the heart of a star. The craftsmanship is so detailed that you can see tiny runes carved into each link, symbols so small they're barely visible, but somehow make the whole necklace feel alive with quiet magic. Freyja notices you watching and smiles, the kind of gentle smile that makes you feel like you've been welcomed into something special. "Come in," she says softly, her voice carrying the warmth of honey mead on a winter night. "I was just thinking about how this necklace came to be. Would you like to hear the story? It's not exciting, mind you, just the quiet tale of patience and careful work, the kind of story that's perfect for a peaceful morning like this." You settle into a comfortable chair near the window, where you can watch the mist swirl outside, while Freyja continues her gentle polishing. She tells you that the necklace wasn't always hers. Long ago, before the current golden links existed, there was simply an idea, Freyja's wish for something beautiful that could hold a piece of her essence, something she could wear close to her heart that would remind her of home no matter how far she traveled. The creation began not with grand pronouncements or dramatic forging, but with Freyja sitting much as she sits now, sketching designs on pieces of bark with a piece of charcoal. She would draw for hours, erasing and redrawing, trying to capture the exact curve that would feel right against her throat, the precise weight that wouldn't tire her neck during long journeys. She wanted something that would feel like a second skin, so comfortable she would forget she was wearing it, yet so beautiful that it would remind others of the gentle power that flows through all growing things. When she finally had a design that felt right, Freyja took her sketches to the master craftsmen of Alfheim, the light elves who were known for their delicate work with precious metals. But even they shook their heads when they saw what she wanted. The links would need to be so fine, so perfectly balanced, that the slightest mistake would ruin months of work. The runes would need to be carved with tools finer than spider's silk, and the gold itself would need to be purer than any they had worked with before. It took 3 years to gather the right materials. The gold came from streams that flowed beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, where the water was so pure it sang as it moved over the rocks. Collecting it required patience, sitting by the streams for days at a time, panning through sand and pebbles to find flakes of metal that gleamed like tiny suns. Freyja often did this work herself, finding peace in the repetitive motion of swirling water in her pan, listening to the gentle babble of the stream, and watching the way sunlight danced on the water's surface. The actual forging was done over the course of another 2 years. The elven smiths worked in shifts, never allowing the forge to grow too hot or too cold, maintaining the precise temperature needed to keep the gold malleable without making it too soft. Each link was shaped by hand, heated and reheated dozens of times, until it achieved the exact curve and thickness that Freyja had envisioned. The work was so delicate that it could only be done in the early morning hours when the air was still and there were no vibrations to disturb the careful hammering. You watch Freyja's face as she tells this story, noting how her expression grows soft and peaceful when she describes the patient work of the craftsman. There's something soothing about hearing how something beautiful came to exist, not through magic or force, but through careful attention and quiet dedication. The kind of work that requires you to slow down, to pay attention to small details, to find satisfaction in incremental progress rather than dramatic achievements. The runes, Freyja explains, were the most challenging part. Each symbol had to be carved when the gold was at exactly the right temperature, warm enough to yield to the carving tool, but cool enough that it wouldn't lose its shape. The craftsman who did this work was an elderly elf who had spent centuries perfecting his technique. His hands were so steady that he could carve letters smaller than pine needles, and his eyes were so sharp that he could see imperfections invisible to others. He worked by candlelight, often pausing to rest his eyes and hands, never rushing despite the years the project was taking. The runes themselves told a story, though not in the way you might expect. Rather than spelling out words or casting spells, each symbol represented a moment of peace or contentment that Freyja wanted to remember. One rune captured the feeling of warm sunlight on bare shoulders during the first day of spring. Another held the memory of rain on leaves, the gentle percussion that helps you fall asleep on stormy nights. There was a rune for the satisfaction of bread fresh from the oven, another for the comfort of a cat purring in your lap, and one for the quiet joy of watching children play in the distance while you rest in the shade. When the necklace was finally complete, the presentation wasn't a grand ceremony, but a quiet moment, much like this one. Freyja received it in the morning, in a chamber filled with soft light, with only the craftsman present to see her reaction. She lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, substantial enough to remind her of its presence, but light enough to wear comfortably for days at a time. The gold was warm to the touch, as if it had absorbed years of careful handling and kind intention. The first time she wore it, Freyja told you, she understood that the necklace was more than beautiful jewelry. It was a reminder of patience, of the value of taking time to do things properly, of the way beauty emerges not from rushed inspiration, but from sustained attention and care. When she touched it throughout the day, she remembered the gentle concentration of the craftsman, the peaceful hours spent planning and designing, the quiet satisfaction of work done well. As Freyja finishes her story, you notice that the morning mist has cleared and soft sunlight now streams through the window, making her necklace glow even more warmly. She places it carefully in a silk-lined box, but not before holding it up one more time to catch the light. You can see how the runes seem to shimmer with their own inner radiance, each tiny symbol holding its small piece of captured contentment. The interesting thing about beautiful objects, Freyja says thoughtfully, closing the box with a gentle click, is that they teach us about the beauty that already exists in quiet moments and careful work. This necklace reminds me that the most precious things often come from patience rather than force, from attention rather than ambition. She pauses, looking out the window where birds are beginning their morning songs. But I wonder, do you think the Valkyries understand this same lesson as they ride across the vast sky? Their work is so different from mine, yet perhaps there's a similar kind of peace to be found in their daily journeys. Following Freyja's wondering thoughts about the Valkyries and their sky journeys, you find yourself drawn to look out her window, where the morning sky stretches endless and blue above Asgard, and as if summoned by your curiosity, you notice distant figures moving with graceful purpose across the heavens, the Valkyries beginning their daily rounds, their winged horses moving with the steady rhythm of gentle waves across a calm sea. You excuse yourself from Freyja's chamber, and make your way to one of Asgard's highest towers, where you can better observe these legendary warrior maidens in their element. What strikes you first is not their fearsome reputation, but rather how peaceful they look from this distance, moving across the sky with the unhurried confidence of experienced travelers who know their route well and are in no particular rush to reach their destination. The Valkyries you're watching are not heading into battle. That dramatic work takes up only a small portion of their time. Instead, they're engaged in the quieter aspects of their duties, surveying the 9 realms, checking on distant outposts, carrying messages between the gods, and simply maintaining their presence as guardians of the cosmic order. It's work that requires them to spend long hours in the saddle, moving from realm to realm with the patient persistence of mail carriers, or traveling judges making their regular circuits. From your vantage point, you can make out about a dozen Valkyries spread across the morning sky. Each rides a horse with wings that seem to be made of cloud and starlight, beating with a rhythm so steady and hypnotic that just watching them makes you feel drowsy and peaceful. The horses don't flap their wings frantically like birds. Instead, their wing beats are slow and powerful, each stroke carrying them forward for what must be miles before the next beat is needed. It's the kind of measured, economical movement that speaks of creatures built for endurance rather than speed. One Valkyrie passes close enough to your tower that you can see her more clearly. She's dressed in practical traveling clothes rather than gleaming armor, a warm cloak that streams behind her in the wind, sturdy boots, and a simple helmet that protects her face from the rushing air. Her spear is strapped securely to her back, and her shield hangs from her saddle like a traveler's pack. She looks comfortable and relaxed. Someone who has made this journey so many times that she can let her mind wander while her horse follows familiar routes through the sky. You watch her check something that might be a map or a list of destinations, then pat her horse's neck affectionately before settling back into her saddle for what appears to be a long stretch of straight flying. There's something deeply soothing about watching this routine unfold, the way she adjusts her position slightly for comfort, the way her horse responds to subtle shifts in weight and direction, the easy partnership between rider and mount that speaks of years spent traveling together. The sky around the Valkyries is painted in soft shades of blue and white, with clouds that look like they've been brushed onto the heavens with the lightest possible touch. The air up there must be clean and cold, carrying scents of snow from distant mountains and the green smell of forests far below. You imagine how peaceful it must be to ride through such vastness, with nothing but the steady rhythm of wings and the gentle whistle of wind past your ears, feeling like you're suspended between earth and stars in a place where time moves differently than it does for those of us bound to the ground. As you continue watching, you begin to notice the subtle ways the Valkyries communicate with each other across the vast distances of sky. Occasionally, one will raise her spear in a specific pattern, and another Valkyrie miles away will respond with her own gesture, a simple greeting perhaps, or a signal that all is well in her assigned territory. Sometimes they'll adjust their flight paths slightly, to converge for a brief conversation, their horses flying close enough for the riders to exchange a few words before separating again to continue their individual routes. These aerial conversations look wonderfully peaceful from your distant perspective. Two Valkyries will match their horses' speed and direction, flying side by side for what might be several miles while they chat. You can't hear their words, of course, but their body language suggests the kind of comfortable conversation that develops between colleagues who work well together, sharing observations about their travels perhaps, or simply enjoying each other's company during what must often be solitary work. One pair of Valkyries, you observe, seems to be sharing a meal as they fly, passing something back and forth between their horses, with the casual ease of people who have perfected this mid-air dining technique through long practice. There's something charmingly domestic about watching them eat together while soaring through the clouds, like seeing travelers share lunch during a long coach ride, except their coach happens to be the open sky, and their horses have wings. The more you watch, the more you appreciate the skill required for this kind of flying. The Valkyries make it look effortless, but you can see the tiny adjustments they're constantly making, small shifts in posture to account for changing air currents, gentle touches to guide their horses around obstacles like cloud banks or other aerial traffic, subtle corrections to stay on course despite winds that must be constantly shifting at their altitude. It's the kind of expertise that can only be developed through thousands of hours of practice, the same way a master craftswoman develops an instinctive feel for her tools and materials. You notice that each Valkyrie seems to have her own flying style, as distinctive as a signature. One rides with perfect military posture, straight-backed and alert, scanning the horizon constantly, like a guard on patrol. Another slouches comfortably in her saddle, completely relaxed, trusting her horse to navigate while she attends to other tasks, perhaps planning her route, or simply daydreaming. A third rocks gently with her horse's wing rhythm, moving in perfect harmony with her mount's motion in a way that makes them look like a single creature, rather than rider and horse. Their horses, too, show individual personalities. Some fly with their necks arched proudly, showing off their magnificent wings with each stroke. Others adopt a more workmanlike approach, heads down and focused on covering distance efficiently. You see one horse that seems particularly playful, occasionally adding an unnecessary barrel roll or loop to its flight path, just for the joy of movement, while its rider laughs and goes along with the impromptu aerobatics. As the morning progresses, you watch the Valkyries gradually spread out across greater distances as they head toward their various destinations. Some disappear toward the horizon, becoming tiny specks, and then vanishing entirely as they travel to distant realms. Others spiral down toward Midgard, presumably to check on human affairs or deliver messages. A few turn back toward Asgard, their missions already complete, flying with the satisfied air of workers heading home after a productive day. The last Valkyrie you can clearly see takes a moment to pause in her flight, hovering in place while her horse's wings beat slowly to maintain altitude. She seems to be taking in the view, the patchwork of realms spread below, the vast dome of sky above, the distant mountains and forests that mark the boundaries of the known world. There's something contemplative about her stillness, as if she's taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of her aerial workplace, to feel grateful for the privilege of seeing the world from such a unique perspective. Watching her hover there, silhouetted against the morning sky, you're struck by how different the Valkyries' daily reality must be from the dramatic stories told about them. Yes, they're warriors when battle calls for it, but most of their time seems to be spent in this kind of peaceful patrol work, flying their regular routes, maintaining communication networks, keeping watch over the realms with the steady dedication of lighthouse keepers or forest rangers. It's work that requires patience, reliability, and a deep love of solitude and sky. The silence up there must be profound, broken only by the whisper of wind and the rhythmic beat of wings. No crowds, no noise, no distractions, just the endless blue expanse of sky and the meditative rhythm of flight. You imagine how this daily immersion in such vastness must shape the Valkyries' perspective, giving them a sense of scale and tranquility that comes from spending so much time suspended between earth and heaven, moving through space so quietly that they barely disturb the air around them. As the last visible Valkyrie finally disappears into the distance, you remain at your window, feeling oddly peaceful after watching their serene aerial dance. The sky seems emptier now without their graceful figures, but also somehow more spacious, as if their presence had reminded you of how vast and beautiful the world is when viewed from the right perspective. You find yourself wondering where they go when their sky work is done, what kind of halls welcome them home after long days of flying through clouds and starlight. If you're finding peace in these gentle Norse tales, consider subscribing for more quiet mythology journeys, but only if it feels right for you tonight. Your thoughts about where the Valkyries go to rest naturally lead you to consider Sessrúmnir, Freyja's great hall, where half of those who die in battle come to spend their afterlife. Unlike the boisterous warrior paradise of Valhalla that gets most of the attention in the stories, Sessrúmnir is a gentler place, designed for a different kind of rest and reflection. You find yourself walking toward this hall as the afternoon light grows soft and golden, curious to see what makes it so different from its more famous counterpart. The approach to Sessrúmnir is not grand or imposing, but rather welcoming in the way that a well-loved home feels welcoming. The path winds through gardens where herbs and flowers grow in comfortable abundance, not the formal display gardens of a palace, but the practical, beautiful gardens of someone who genuinely loves growing things. You pass beds of chamomile and lavender, their scents mixing in the warm air, and notice fruit trees heavy with apples and pears that anyone passing by is clearly meant to sample. The hall itself is built of golden wood that seems to glow with its own inner light, but the glow is warm and soft rather than brilliant or overwhelming. The walls are carved with intricate patterns, but these too are gentle, flowing designs that suggest growing vines and running water, rather than dramatic scenes of battle or conquest. The roof is thatched with what looks like golden straw, and smoke rises peacefully from several chimneys, suggesting hearth fires burning steadily inside. As you approach the main doors, which stand open to welcome visitors, you can hear the sounds that define this place, not the clash of weapons or boisterous singing, but rather the quiet murmur of conversation, occasional laughter that sounds genuinely joyful rather than forced, and the gentle notes of someone playing a harp with skilled but unshowy fingers. There's also the homey sound of cooking, pots simmering, bread baking, the kind of kitchen sounds that make any building feel like home. Inside, Sessrúmnir reveals itself as a place designed for comfort rather than grandeur. The Great Hall is certainly large enough to hold many people, but it's divided into smaller, more intimate spaces by screens and pillars, creating cozy nooks where small groups can gather for conversation, or individuals can find solitude when they need it. The furniture is well made but comfortable, chairs with soft cushions, tables worn smooth by years of use, benches positioned to catch the best light for reading or handwork. The warriors who have come to Sessrúmnir after their deaths are not the stereotypical berserkers you might expect. These are thoughtful fighters, people who fought when necessary but never lost their essential gentleness, who protected others rather than seeking glory for themselves. Some are women who defended their families and villages, others are men who chose to fight only when peaceful solutions failed. What they all share is a quality of quiet strength and an appreciation for the peaceful aspects of life that they protected through their sacrifice. You watch them as they go about their daily activities in the hall, and what strikes you most is how normal and pleasant their afterlife appears to be. Some are engaged in crafts, weaving, carving, metalwork, done for the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, rather than for any practical purpose. Others are tending to the hall's many animals, cats that curl up in sunny spots, dogs that follow their favorite people around, horses in the stables outside that are ridden for pleasure rather than warfare. One group has gathered around a woman who is clearly a skilled storyteller, but she's not recounting tales of battles or heroic deeds. Instead, she's telling stories about daily life in Midgard, funny things that happened in markets, the antics of children, the way different villages celebrate their seasonal festivals. Her audience listens with the deep attention of people who remember and treasure these small moments of humanity, these reminders of what made life worth living and protecting. Near one of the large windows, several warriors are engaged in what appears to be a friendly debate about the best methods for growing vegetables. They're comparing techniques for composting, discussing the merits of different varieties of beans, and sharing advice about dealing with garden pests. Their conversation has the easy flow of people who have all the time in the world to explore topics that interest them, without the pressure of needing to reach quick decisions or solve urgent problems. In another corner, you notice someone teaching a small class on reading and writing. Several of the warriors gathered around the teacher are clearly learning these skills for the first time. They lived and died in times or places where literacy was rare, but here in Sessrúmnir, they have the opportunity to discover the pleasure of books and written knowledge. The teacher is patient and encouraging, celebrating each small success as her students master new letters or manage to read simple sentences. The dining area of the hall showcases another aspect of Sessrúmnir's character. While Valhalla is famous for its endless supplies of mead and roasted boar, the food here is more varied and frankly more appealing to modern tastes. There are fresh fruits and vegetables from Freyja's gardens, bread baked in dozens of different styles, soups and stews that simmer gently and fill the air with wonderful aromas. The dining is communal but not forced. People eat together when they want company and alone when they prefer solitude, and both choices are respected. You observe the meal preparation, and notice how many of the warriors participate in cooking, not as a chore, but as a pleasant activity they can share. Some have discovered talents for baking or brewing that they never had the chance to develop during their mortal lives. Others simply enjoy the meditative aspects of chopping vegetables or stirring pots, finding peace in the simple, repetitive tasks that keep a household running smoothly. Freyja herself moves through the hall like a gracious host rather than a distant goddess. She stops to chat with individuals, asks about their projects, offers gentle advice when it's requested, and clearly takes genuine pleasure in seeing her guests comfortable and content. She's not trying to inspire them to future battles or maintain their warrior edge. Instead, she's helping them discover the parts of themselves that warfare didn't allow them to fully explore. You watch her sit with an elderly warrior who is learning to play the flute, offering patient encouragement as he struggles with a difficult passage. Later, you see her kneeling in the garden, alongside several others, her hands dirty with soil as she helps plant new flower beds. Her approach to leadership is nurturing rather than commanding, creating an atmosphere where people feel safe to be vulnerable, to try new things, to admit what they don't know without fear of judgment. The daily rhythm of Sessrúmnir is gentle and natural. People rise when they feel rested, eat when they're hungry, pursue activities that interest them without rigid schedules or expectations. Some days are social, filled with group activities and shared projects. Other days are contemplative, with individuals spending time alone in the gardens or the hall's quiet reading rooms. The flexibility allows everyone to find their own balance between solitude and community. As evening approaches, the hall takes on an even more peaceful atmosphere. Candles and oil lamps are lit, creating pools of warm light that make every corner feel intimate and safe. Some people gather around the hearth fires to share quiet conversations, others continue their individual projects, and a few simply sit and watch the flames, lost in comfortable reverie. The sounds of the day gradually soften, conversations become murmurs, footsteps grow gentler, even the cooking sounds from the kitchen take on a more subdued quality. You notice that many of the warriors spend this evening time writing, not battle reports or heroic poems, but letters to loved ones they've left behind, journals about their experiences in Sessrúmnir, or simple observations about the beauty they see around them each day. The writing seems to serve as both a form of meditation and a way of processing their transition from their mortal lives to this new existence. Freyja has provided them with beautiful materials, fine paper, well-made pens, ink in various colors, treating their thoughts and memories as precious things worthy of preservation. As you prepare to leave Sessrúmnir, you're struck by how this hall represents a different vision of what it means to honor fallen warriors, rather than eternal combat training. It offers eternal growth and discovery, rather than preserving them as they were at the moment of death. It allows them to become more fully themselves. The peace here isn't the peace of inaction, but the peace of people who have found meaningful ways to spend their time, who are surrounded by beauty and kindness, who have been given the ultimate gift of freedom from urgency and pressure. Standing at the threshold of the hall, looking back at the warm lights and listening to the gentle sounds of contentment, you wonder about the deeper connections between this place and the stories of Freyja's treasures. How does the creation of something beautiful, like that golden necklace you learned about this morning, relate to the creation of this beautiful space for healing and growth? Perhaps both require the same patient attention, the same commitment to nurturing rather than forcing. Your meditation on creation and patience brings to mind one of the most famous stories about Freyja, the acquisition of her magnificent necklace Brisingamen. Though this tale unfolds quite differently from the dramatic versions often told around evening fires, the real story is one of careful negotiation, artistic appreciation, and the slow development of mutual respect between a goddess who understood beauty and craftsmen who could create it. You find yourself imagining the scene as it truly happened, not in some grand throne room or dramatic battlefield, but in the underground workshop of four dwarven brothers, whose skill with gold and gems had become legendary throughout the 9 realms. The workshop itself would have been a marvel, not dark and grimy as some might expect, but filled with clever mirrors and crystal lenses that captured and directed natural light from above ground, creating a workspace bright enough for the most delicate carving and precise enough for setting the tiniest stones. The 4 brothers, Alfrig, Berling, Grur, and Oin, had been working together for so long that they moved around their shared space with the unconscious coordination of dancers who had performed the same routine for centuries. Each had his own specialty. One was master of the forge and could work metal at temperatures that would destroy lesser craftsmen's tools. Another could cut and polish gems until they seemed to hold starlight in their depths. The third could draw gold wire, so fine it was nearly invisible yet stronger than iron chains. And the fourth could assemble the most complex pieces, bringing together dozens of individual elements into unified works of art. They had been working on Brisingamen for months before Freyja ever heard of it, not as a commission, or with any particular customer in mind, but simply because they had imagined something so beautiful that they couldn't resist the challenge of bringing it into existence. The necklace began as a conversation during their evening meal, each brother contributing ideas about techniques they'd like to try, materials they'd been saving for a special project, designs they'd been sketching in their spare time. The central element was a gem unlike any other, not a traditional precious stone, but a piece of crystallized fire that they had found in the deep places of the earth, where the roots of mountains touched the primal forces of creation. The crystal seemed to burn with its own inner light, shifting from gold to red to deep amber as it moved, and it had taken them weeks just to figure out how to cut it without destroying its natural luminescence. Around this central fire gem, they had created a setting of gold so pure and perfectly worked that it seemed almost liquid, flowing in organic curves that complemented the crystal's natural beauty, rather than constraining it. The gold had been alloyed, with trace amounts of other metals, a touch of silver for flexibility, a hint of copper for warmth, creating a color and texture that seemed to glow with life. The metalwork alone had taken 2 months of patient hammering, annealing, and polishing. When Freyja first heard rumors of this extraordinary necklace, she didn't immediately rush to acquire it. Instead, she spent time learning about the 4 brothers, understanding their reputation for honest dealing, their commitment to excellence, and their deep knowledge of their craft. She asked other customers about their experiences, examined examples of their previous work, and gradually developed an appreciation for the philosophy behind their artistry. Her first visit to their workshop was presented as a courtesy call, rather than a business negotiation. She came not in full divine regalia, but dressed as any wealthy customer might dress, and she spent the entire afternoon simply observing their work and asking thoughtful questions about their techniques. The brothers, for their part, treated her with respectful interest rather than awe, recognizing her knowledge and genuine appreciation for craftsmanship. When they finally showed her Brisingamen, the presentation was simple and elegant. They had placed it on a piece of black velvet in a wooden box lined with silk, and they opened the box without fanfare, allowing the necklace's own beauty to speak for itself. Freyja's reaction was everything they could have hoped for, not dramatic gasps or exclamations, but a deep appreciative silence as she took in every detail of their work. She asked if she might hold it, and when they agreed, she lifted it with the care it deserved, feeling its weight and balance, examining the precision of the setting and the way the light played through the central crystal. She asked technical questions about the construction, showing that she understood the challenges they had overcome and the innovations they had developed. It was clear that she wasn't just admiring a pretty object, but recognizing the skill and dedication that had gone into its creation. The negotiation that followed was conducted over several visits, spread across weeks, as both parties took time to consider what would constitute a fair exchange. The brothers weren't motivated primarily by profit. They had more commissions than they could handle, and their reputation ensured a steady income. What they wanted was to see their masterpiece owned by someone who would truly appreciate it, who would wear it with understanding of its significance rather than simply as a display of wealth. Freyja, for her part, was willing to pay any reasonable price, but she was more interested in establishing a relationship with the craftsman than in completing a simple transaction. She saw in them the same appreciation for beauty and excellence that motivated her own work, and she recognized that owning their masterpiece would create a connection to their vision and dedication that went far beyond mere possession. The terms they eventually agreed upon reflected the unusual nature of their relationship. In addition to payment in gold and precious materials, Freyja agreed to spend one day with each brother, sharing her knowledge of magic as it related to their craft. Techniques for preserving metals against tarnish, methods for enhancing the natural properties of gems, ways to imbue crafted objects with subtle enchantments that would protect them against damage or theft. These teaching sessions became some of the most pleasant days any of them could remember. Freyja proved to be an excellent teacher, patient and clear in her explanations, willing to repeat demonstrations until each brother mastered the techniques she was sharing. The brothers, in turn, showed her advanced metalworking methods that even a goddess could appreciate, ways of achieving effects that she had always accomplished through magic, but had never understood from a purely technical perspective. The actual transfer of the necklace was ceremonial in the best sense, meaningful without being pretentious. The brothers presented it in a specially crafted box made of rare wood and lined with silk they had woven themselves, along with a detailed description of its construction and care. Freyja accepted it with genuine gratitude, and she immediately put it on, understanding that it was meant to be worn and appreciated, rather than stored away as a treasure. From that day forward, Brisingamen became more than just an ornament to Freyja. Wearing it reminded her daily of the patience and skill required to create something truly beautiful, of the satisfaction that comes from work done excellently, and of the connections that can develop between people who share a commitment to bringing beauty into the world. The necklace became a symbol not just of her own status, but of her appreciation for the craftsmen and artists whose work enriches life for everyone. The four brothers, too, found that the exchange had enriched their work in ways they hadn't anticipated. The magical techniques Freyja had taught them allowed them to create pieces that were not only beautiful but durable in ways that defied natural law. More importantly, they had gained a patron who understood their art and could help them connect with customers who would properly value their creations. In the years that followed, Freyja often returned to their workshop, not always to commission new pieces, but sometimes simply to observe their work in progress, or to share ideas about new techniques and materials. These visits became anticipated pleasures for all involved, opportunities to discuss the philosophy of creation, to experiment with new approaches, and to maintain the friendship that had grown from their initial business relationship. The story of Brisingamen, understood in this way, becomes a meditation on the true nature of value, not just the economic exchange of money for goods, but the deeper exchange of appreciation, knowledge, and mutual respect that occurs when people recognize excellence in each other's work. It's a reminder that the most meaningful transactions are those that enrich both parties, creating relationships that last far longer than the immediate exchange. As you consider this gentler version of how Freyja acquired her famous necklace, you're struck by how different it feels from the dramatic tales of trickery or seduction that are sometimes told. This version suggests that true beauty, whether in objects or relationships, emerges from patience, mutual respect, and shared commitment to excellence rather than from force or manipulation. But what happens when someone who embodies these gentle values faces genuine loss? How does a goddess of beauty and love cope when the world suddenly becomes empty and cold? The peaceful stories of craftsmanship and appreciation take on a deeper meaning when you consider how Freyja faced the greatest challenge that can befall someone whose nature is to love deeply, the mysterious disappearance of her husband Other. This is not a tale of dramatic confrontation or mythic battles. but rather the quiet story of how someone continues to function, to care for others, and to maintain hope when the person who means most to them vanishes without explanation or farewell. You imagine Freyja's life before this loss as being filled with the particular contentment that comes from loving someone who loves you equally in return. Other was not a prominent figure in the great tales of gods and heroes, and perhaps that was part of what made him perfect for Freyja. He was someone who appreciated the same quiet beauties that she cherished, the way morning light fell across their chamber, the satisfaction of a meal prepared with care, the pleasure of long conversations that meandered through topics both serious and silly, without any need to reach important conclusions. Their daily life together would have been marked by the small rituals that develop between people who know each other well, and choose each other anew each day. Perhaps Other always rose first, and would have tea ready by the time Freyja woke. Maybe she had a habit of humming while she worked, and he had learned to identify her moods by the songs she chose. These tiny patterns of consideration and attention, invisible to outsiders, but precious to the people involved, would have been the foundation of their happiness together. When Other first began to seem restless, Freyja probably attributed it to the same wanderlust that occasionally affects many people, especially those with curious minds and adventurous spirits. He might have spoken of places he wanted to visit, knowledge he wanted to acquire, people he wanted to meet in distant realms. Such desires are natural and healthy, and Freyja, being neither possessive nor controlling, would have encouraged him to pursue whatever experiences called to him. The departure, when it came, was probably presented as temporary, Other likely expected to be gone for months rather than years, pursuing some project or investigation that genuinely excited him. He would have promised to send word regularly, to return with stories and gifts, to share everything he learnt during his travels. Freyja would have helped him prepare, perhaps creating small magical protections for his journey, certainly sending him off with her blessing and her love. The first few months of his absence would have been manageable, even pleasant in some ways. Freyja had her own responsibilities and interests to occupy her time, and she would have enjoyed the anticipation of his return, imagining the reunion and all the things they would have to talk about. She might have begun preparing surprises for his homecoming, redecorating their chamber, planning special meals, creating small gifts that would show how much she had thought of him while he was away. But as months stretched into years with no word, no sign, no trace of where he might have gone, or what might have happened to him, she faced the particular anguish of not knowing, unable to grieve properly, because she didn't know if Other was dead, unable to move forward, because she didn't know if he might return at any moment, unable to search effectively, because she had no clue where to begin looking. The tears that began to fall during this period were unlike any she had ever wept before. They came not from momentary sadness or frustration, but from a deeper well of grief that seemed to have no bottom, and these tears, infused with the essence of a goddess whose nature was tied to love and beauty, transformed as they fell, becoming drops of pure gold that scattered wherever they touched the earth. At first, the golden tears were simply a curious side effect of her sorrow, something she barely noticed in her preoccupation with worry and longing. But as days passed and the tears continued, she began to see them differently, not as a manifestation of her pain, but as a reminder that even loss and sadness could create something beautiful if approached with the right spirit. The gold seemed to suggest that her love for Other was so real and precious that it could transform even her grief into something valuable. This realization didn't end her sadness or make her stop missing Other, but it did give her a way to think about her situation that allowed her to continue functioning. She began to collect the golden tears, not out of greed, but as a way of honoring both her love and her loss. Each drop represented a moment when she had chosen to feel deeply rather than to shut down, to remain open to love, despite the pain it could bring. As word of her situation spread throughout the 9 realms, Freyja found herself receiving visits from others who had experienced similar losses, people whose loved ones had vanished in wars, disappeared during travels, or simply walked away from relationships without explanation. They came seeking comfort, but they also brought comfort, sharing their own stories and coping strategies, creating an informal community of people who understood the particular challenge of loving someone you cannot find. These conversations helped Freyja understand that her experience, while uniquely painful, was not entirely unique in its nature. The fundamental challenge of continuing to love someone who is absent, of maintaining hope without certainty, of functioning normally, while carrying a constant background ache of longing, is something that many people face in various forms. Recognizing this commonality helped her feel less isolated in her grief. She began to develop routines and practices that helped her manage the daily reality of Orther's absence. Each morning she would take time to remember something specific about him, not just the fact that she missed him, but a particular conversation they had shared, a joke he told, a way he had of looking at things that had made her see them differently. This practice kept her connection to him vivid and real without allowing it to become an obsession that prevented her from engaging with present life. Her work as a goddess continued, and in some ways became even more important to her than before. Helping others with their own concerns about love, fertility, and beauty gave her a sense of purpose that transcended her personal situation. She found that her own experience of loss had deepened her empathy and made her better able to understand and assist people who were struggling with relationship problems or facing their own losses. The search for Other became a background constant in her life, rather than an all-consuming obsession. She made inquiries whenever she traveled, asked other gods and magical beings to keep watch for any sign of him, and followed up on any rumors or suggestions that seemed even remotely promising. But she did this work steadily and methodically, rather than frantically, understanding that desperate searching was likely to be less effective than patient, systematic effort. During the long evenings when loneliness hit hardest, Freyja often found solace in her various treasures and keepsakes, not because they could replace Orther's presence, but because they reminded her of the continuity of beauty and meaning in life. The golden necklace from the Dwarven brothers reminded her that patient work could create lasting value. The peaceful atmosphere of Sessrúmnir showed her that healing and growth were possible even after great loss. The golden tears themselves proved that love could transform even pain into something precious. Years passed this way, with Freyja learning to carry her loss gracefully while remaining open to whatever possibilities the future might bring. She never stopped hoping that Orther might return, but she also never stopped living fully in whatever circumstances she faced each day. The balance between remembering the past, engaging with the present, and remaining open to future possibilities became a kind of art form, something she practiced with the same dedication that craftsmen brought to their work. The goddess who wept golden tears became, in her own way, a master of one of life's most difficult skills, the ability to love deeply while accepting uncertainty, to grieve thoroughly while continuing to function, to remain open to joy while acknowledging sorrow. Her tears of gold became symbols not just of loss, but of the transformative power of love that refuses to become bitter, hope that refuses to become desperate, and strength that grows from gentleness rather than hardness. As you reflect on Freyja's patient endurance of this most personal trial, you find yourself wondering how her experience might have influenced her understanding of the warriors who came to her hall, especially those who had also learned to balance strength with gentleness. Perhaps there are connections between the way she learned to carry her loss and the way others learn to carry their own burdens with grace. These quiet Norse tales continue to unfold gently. If they're helping you unwind, a gentle subscribe would mean so much. But rest is more important than anything else right now. Drawing from Freyja's example of carrying loss with dignity and strength, you turn your attention to another group of women who understood the balance between warrior courage and gentle wisdom, the shield-maidens of Midgard. These were not mythological figures like the Valkyries, but real women who chose to take up arms when their communities needed protection, and whose daily lives reflected the same kind of quiet strength that Freyja demonstrated in her personal trials. You envision a particular group of shield maidens from a northern settlement, women who came together not through formal military recruitment, but through the natural bonds that form between people who share similar values and find themselves facing similar challenges. Some were daughters of farmers who had learned swordwork alongside their brothers. Others were widows who refused to become helpless when their husbands fell in battle. A few were simply women who felt called to protect those who could not protect themselves, regardless of whether such a calling fit traditional expectations. Their daily training rides became a ritual that served multiple purposes beyond simple military preparation. Each morning, just as the sun rose high enough to burn off the night's dew, you would see them gathering at the edge of their village, checking their horses' gear with the thorough care of people whose lives might depend on every strap and buckle being secure. Their horses were not war horses in the dramatic sense, but sturdy, reliable animals chosen for endurance and sure footing rather than intimidating appearance. The lead rider, a woman named Astrid, who had earned her authority through demonstrated wisdom rather than inherited rank, would review the day's route with the others before they set out. These consultations were always democratic, with everyone free to suggest modifications based on their knowledge of local conditions, their horses' particular needs, or their own sense of what kind of training would be most valuable on any given day. Their rides typically followed a circuit that took them through various types of terrain around their settlement. Forest paths, where they practiced maneuvering between trees and dealing with uneven ground. Open meadows where they could work on formation riding and communication signals. Rocky hills that tested both their own balance and their horses' sure-footedness. Each type of landscape presented different challenges and required different skills, so rotating through them all ensured comprehensive preparation for whatever situations they might eventually face. What struck any observer about these training rides was how little they resembled the dramatic cavalry charges depicted in heroic stories. Most of their work was slow, methodical, and focused on practical skills that were more important than impressive. They spent time practicing mounting and dismounting quickly, communicating clearly over distances, coordinating their movements without constant verbal commands, and maintaining their equipment while in the field. The shield-maidens had developed their own system of hand signals that allowed them to coordinate their actions while riding, a necessity when moving at speed or in situations where vocal communication might alert enemies to their presence. During their training rides, you could see them practicing these signals constantly. One rider would give a command gesture, and the others would respond appropriately, adjusting their formation or changing their pace based on silent communication. The system was elegant in its simplicity and effectiveness. Their conversations during rest breaks revealed the thoughtful approach they brought to their role as protectors. They discussed not just military tactics, but the broader questions of when force was justified, how to minimize harm to non-combatants, and ways to resolve conflicts through negotiation when possible. These were not women who glorified violence, but rather people who accepted the responsibility of being prepared for violence when it was the only way to protect innocent people. Many of their rides included practical community service alongside military training. They might deliver messages to isolated farms, check on elderly residents who lived alone, or transport supplies to people who were unable to make the journey to town themselves. This integration of martial preparation with community care reflected their understanding that a warrior's primary duty is protection and service rather than conquest or personal glory. The horses they rode seemed to reflect their riders' balanced approach to strength and gentleness. These animals were trained for reliability and calm responsiveness rather than aggressive behavior. During breaks, you could see the deep affection between riders and mounts, horses being petted and spoken to softly, riders sharing apples or other treats, the kind of mutual care that develops between partners who trust each other completely and work together regularly. When they encountered other travelers during their rides, the shield-maidens' behavior demonstrated their fundamental orientation toward protection rather than intimidation. They would offer assistance to anyone who seemed to need help, share information about road conditions or local hazards, and generally present themselves as a resource for community safety, rather than a threat to be avoided. Their weapons and armor were visible but not prominently displayed, suggesting readiness without aggression. The seasonal rhythm of their training rides reflected both practical necessities and their deep connection to the natural world around their community. In spring, they focused on longer rides that helped them and their horses build endurance after the relative inactivity of winter. Summer rides often included overnight camping, giving them experience with extended operations and self-sufficiency in the field. Autumn rides emphasized speed and efficiency, preparing for winter conditions when quick response might be crucial. Even their winter training, conducted on snowshoes rather than horseback, maintained their fitness and their bonds as a group. The camaraderie among the shield-maidens was evident in the way they supported each other through the challenges of training and the broader challenges of living in a world that didn't always approve of their choices. Newer members received patient instruction from more experienced riders, not just in technical skills, but in the mental and emotional aspects of warrior training. Veterans shared stories that helped newcomers understand what they might face and how to cope with fear, uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility. Their equipment maintenance, conducted together after each ride, became a time for quiet conversation and mutual support. While cleaning tack and checking weapons, they would share concerns about their families, discuss community issues that might require their attention, or simply enjoy the peaceful satisfaction of caring for their tools and gear. These sessions reinforced their sense of shared purpose, while attending to the practical details that kept them prepared and effective. The shield-maidens' approach to leadership was notably collaborative, with different women taking charge based on their particular expertise or knowledge, rather than following a rigid hierarchy. During rides through familiar territory, local women would lead the group and share their knowledge of the terrain. When dealing with horse-related problems, the most skilled rider would take charge. This flexible approach to authority ensured that the group could adapt to various situations while maintaining unity and effectiveness. Their rest periods during long rides often included activities that maintained their connection to the peaceful aspects of life they were committed to protecting. Some would practice handicrafts, working on weaving or embroidery projects that they could pursue while sitting in the saddle or during breaks. Others would gather herbs or edible plants, maintaining knowledge of natural resources that could be valuable during extended operations. These activities served as reminders that their warrior identity was only one aspect of their complete selves. As the seasons cycled and their skills developed, the shield-maidens gained a reputation throughout their region not as fearsome fighters to be avoided, but as reliable protectors who could be counted upon in times of trouble. Other communities began requesting their assistance with various problems, and their rides expanded to include longer journeys that allowed them to help settlements beyond their immediate area. This broader service gave them additional training opportunities while reinforcing their sense of purpose. The quiet confidence they developed through their regular training rides became evident in every aspect of their demeanor. They moved with the relaxed alertness of people who were prepared for whatever might happen but not anxious about possibilities they couldn't control. Their horses reflected this same calm readiness, responding to subtle cues and maintaining steady gaits even in challenging conditions. Together, riders and mounts embodied a form of strength that was both formidable and reassuring. As you watch these shield maidens complete another of their regular training rides, returning to their village as the afternoon light begins to fade, you're struck by how their dedication mirrors the patient devotion of Freyja collecting her golden tears, or the careful craftsmanship of the dwarven brothers working on Brisingamen. All of them understand that meaningful strength develops through consistent practice rather than dramatic gestures, through attention to detail rather than grand ambitions. But what happens when such patient preparation meets its ultimate test? When the time comes for these quiet warriors to make the choices that will determine who lives and who dies in battle. Following the thoughtful preparation of the shield maidens, your attention turns to one of those pivotal moments, when all such training and dedication faces its ultimate test. A battle where the Valkyries themselves descended to make their solemn choices about which of the fallen would be welcomed into the halls of the gods. But this was not the thunderous dramatic affair that epic poems describe. Instead, it unfolded as a quiet, methodical process carried out by beings who understood that their decisions would echo through eternity. You find yourself observing a battlefield in the aftermath of conflict, when the clash of weapons has faded and the surviving warriors have withdrawn to tend their wounded and count their losses. The field is eerily peaceful now, covered with morning mist that softens the harsh realities of war and creates an atmosphere more suited to contemplation than celebration or mourning. It is in this hushed interval between battle and burial that the Valkyries arrive to perform their most sacred duty. They come not with fanfare or dramatic announcements, but with the quiet professionalism of experienced workers who understand the importance of their task. Their horses land softly, wings folding with barely a whisper of sound, and their riders dismount with the careful reverence of people entering a sacred space. Each Valkyrie carries a staff topped with a crystal that glows with soft, steady light, not bright enough to be seen from a distance, but sufficient to illuminate their work in the pre-dawn dimness. The lead Valkyrie, an ancient being whose name has been forgotten by mortals, but whose wisdom is legendary among her sisters, moves slowly among the fallen, pausing beside each body to place her hand gently on the forehead of the deceased. Her touch is not magical in any flashy sense, but rather a quiet communion that allows her to read the story of each warrior's life, to understand the choices they made, the values they held, and the courage they showed or failed to show in their final moments. What she looks for is not necessarily the most skilled fighters or the most successful warriors, but rather those who demonstrated the kind of bravery that transcends mere combat prowess. She seeks evidence of people who protected others at their own expense, who chose to do what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous, who faced their fears and continued fighting not for glory or gain, but because someone needed to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. You watch her kneel beside a young woman whose armor marks her as one of the shield maidens you observed in training. The warrior's sword lies broken beside her, and her shield shows the damage of many impacts, evidence that she stood her ground even when retreat might have been wiser. But what draws the Valkyrie's attention is not these visible signs of struggle, but rather the peaceful expression on the fallen warrior's face, the sense that she died without regret, knowing that her sacrifice had meaning. The Valkyrie's examination reveals the young woman's story, how she left a comfortable life to train as a protector, how she spent years in patient preparation for this moment, how she faced her final battle, not with bloodthirsty excitement, but with calm resolve to do whatever was necessary to protect the non-combatants sheltering behind her line. In her last moments, when her weapon broke and her strength failed, she continued fighting with improvised weapons, and finally with her bare hands, buying precious time for others to escape. This is the kind of courage the Valkyries are instructed to seek, not the flashy heroics of berserkers who fight for the joy of combat, but the steady bravery of people who would prefer to be gardening or raising children or pursuing peaceful crafts, but who accept the burden of violence when it is the only way to protect what they love. The young shield-maiden's name is added to the list of those who will be welcomed in either Valhalla or Sessrúmnir, depending on which hall would better suit her particular nature. Moving to the next fallen warrior, the Valkyrie encounters a more complex story. This man was undoubtedly skilled in combat and died fighting bravely, but his motivations were mixed. Some of his actions were driven by genuine concern for his comrades, but others reflected a desire for personal glory, a need to prove his worth through violence rather than service. His courage was real but incomplete, tainted by selfishness that diminished the purity of his sacrifice. The Valkyrie spends longer considering this case, not because the decision is difficult. Such mixed motivations clearly disqualify someone from the halls of the gods, but because she wants to understand how someone with genuine potential for heroism became sidetracked by lesser concerns. Her analysis serves not only to make the current decision, but to inform future interventions that might help similar warriors develop more complete virtue before they face their final test. A few feet away lies another candidate, whose story initially seems less promising. This warrior was clearly terrified during the battle, probably wanted nothing more than to run away, and never showed the kind of skill or ferocity that marks great fighters. But the Valkyrie's deeper examination reveals that despite his fear, despite his limitations, he never abandoned his post or failed in his duty. When his more skilled comrades fell around him, he continued fighting not because he was brave in any conventional sense, but because running away would have meant abandoning people who were counting on him. This discovery brings a smile to the Valkyrie's face. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act rightly despite fear, and this trembling warrior who fought on when every instinct screamed at him to flee, demonstrates a purity of purpose that more naturally brave fighters might never achieve. His name joins the list of those chosen, not for his prowess in battle but for his refusal to let his limitations become excuses for abandoning his responsibilities. As the morning progresses and more Valkyries arrive to assist with the selection process, you observe the careful way they coordinate their work. Each fallen warrior is examined by multiple Valkyries to ensure consistency and fairness in the decision-making process. They share their insights quietly, discussing borderline cases and seeking consensus when motivations are unclear or when someone's record shows both admirable and questionable choices. The process is neither quick nor casual, reflecting the enormous responsibility involved in these decisions. Each person being evaluated lived a complete life, made countless choices, faced numerous tests of character over years or decades. Reducing such complexity to a simple determination of worthiness requires careful consideration of patterns rather than isolated incidents, ultimate trajectory rather than momentary lapses, fundamental character rather than superficial appearances. One particularly challenging case involves a warrior who showed extraordinary courage and skill in battle, but whose life outside of combat was marked by cruelty to family members and exploitation of those weaker than himself. The Valkyries debate whether battlefield virtue can outweigh civilian vice, whether someone who protects strangers while harming intimates demonstrates genuine heroism or merely enjoys sanctioned violence. The discussion is lengthy and thoughtful, with multiple perspectives considered before reaching a conclusion. Another difficult decision involves a fighter who showed perfect virtue in all aspects of life, but whose courage failed at the crucial moment, who broke and ran when others needed him most. The Valkyries must weigh a lifetime of good choices against a single moment of failure, considering whether fear in extremis negates years of previous bravery, or whether someone can be judged worthy based on their overall character, despite one catastrophic lapse. As the selection process nears completion, you notice how the chosen warriors begin to show signs of the peaceful rest that awaits them. Their faces, which may have been twisted with pain or fear at the moment of death, gradually relax into expressions of contentment and serenity. Their wounds close without scarring, and their broken equipment is mysteriously restored to perfect condition. They appear to be sleeping deeply and peacefully, gathering strength for their journey to whatever hall will welcome them. The Valkyries' own demeanor throughout this process reflects the solemnity of their duty. There is no celebration when someone is chosen, no disappointment when someone fails to qualify. Each decision is simply recorded with the careful attention of clerks maintaining important records, though the consequences of their work will last for eternity. They understand that they are not creating heroes, but simply recognizing heroism that already existed, not bestowing worthiness but acknowledging worthiness that was earned through choice and action. As the final selections are completed, and the chosen warriors are prepared for transport to Asgard, you're struck by how different this reality is from the dramatic stories often told about Valkyries swooping down to claim the greatest fighters. The truth is more nuanced and more interesting. A careful evaluation process conducted by beings who understand that true heroism is about character rather than ability, about service rather than achievement, about choosing to do right even when it's difficult rather than simply being good at violence. The battlefield grows quiet again as the Valkyries complete their work and prepare to depart. The chosen warriors are gently lifted onto special stretchers that will be carried by the winged horses, while the unchosen are left to receive whatever burial rites their comrades and families provide. It's a solemn moment but not a tragic one, as everyone present understands that the selections are based on eternal standards of justice rather than arbitrary preferences or political considerations. As the Valkyries mount their horses and prepare for the journey back to Asgard, you find yourself reflecting on the connection between this careful evaluation of courage and character and the broader themes of patience, craftsmanship, and gradual development that have run through all these stories. Perhaps the formation of a hero follows the same pattern as the creation of a beautiful necklace, or the patient training of shield-maidens, requiring time, attention, and the gradual accumulation of right choices, rather than sudden transformation or dramatic revelation, drawing from the Valkyries' careful discernment of character and worth. Your thoughts turn to another aspect of Freyja's wisdom, her mastery of Sessrúmnir magic, the subtle art of seeing beneath surfaces, and understanding the deeper patterns that connect all things. Unlike the flashy magic of transformation or destruction that fills dramatic tales, Sessrúmnir is a contemplative practice, more akin to meditation or deep study than to the wielding of obvious power. You find yourself in Freyja's private study on a quiet afternoon, when the light streams golden through tall windows and fills the room with warmth that seems to make thinking easier and insights more accessible. This space reflects the nature of Sessrúmnir itself, not a dramatic wizard's tower filled with bubbling cauldrons and crackling energies, but a comfortable room that encourages patience and reflection, furnished with simple wooden tables, comfortable chairs and shelves lined with books, scrolls, and curious objects collected from throughout the 9 realms. Freyja sits at her favorite table, surrounded by what might look like an ordinary collection of natural objects: smooth stones, dried flowers, pieces of wood shaped by wind and water, feathers from various birds, small bones that have been polished to ivory smoothness by time and handling. To untrained eyes, these might appear to be mere curiosities or decorations, but you gradually understand that they serve as tools for a form of divination that relies more on intuition and pattern recognition than on supernatural forces. The practice of Sessrúmnir, as Freyja explains to a small group of students who have gathered for this lesson, begins with learning to see what is already present, rather than trying to force new things into existence. She demonstrates by selecting several items from her collection seemingly at random and arranging them on the polished wood surface of her table. The arrangement appears casual, but you notice that she pays careful attention to relationships, which objects seem to complement each other, which create interesting contrasts, which seem to want to be near or far from their neighbors. Once the objects are arranged to her satisfaction, Freyja sits quietly and simply looks at them, not trying to extract meaning through analysis, but allowing patterns to emerge naturally from sustained, gentle attention. She explains that this process is similar to watching clouds or flames. If you try too hard to see specific shapes, you'll miss the subtle formations that reveal themselves to relaxed observation. The key is to remain alert, but not aggressive, curious but not demanding. Her students, a mixed group that includes both gods and mortals who have shown aptitude for this kind of work, practice the same technique with their own collections of objects. Some struggle with the requirement for patience, wanting to jump quickly to interpretations or conclusions. Others have difficulty trusting their intuitive responses, dismissing insights that seem too simple or obvious. Freyja moves among them, offering gentle guidance, helping each person find their own balance between effort and receptivity. One student, a young woman from Midgard, who has traveled far to study with Freyja, demonstrates the kind of breakthrough that makes teaching worthwhile. She has been staring at her arrangement of stones and twigs for nearly an hour, growing increasingly frustrated with her inability to discern any meaningful pattern. Then, Just as she is about to give up, she stops trying so hard and simply allows her eyes to rest on the objects without forcing them to make sense. In that moment of relaxed attention, she begins to see relationships she hadn't noticed before. The way one stone's curve echoes the bend in a particular twig. How the colors seem to flow from one object to another like a river finding its course. How the negative spaces between objects create shapes that are as significant as the objects themselves. More importantly, these visual relationships begin to suggest emotional and conceptual connections that help her understand a personal situation she has been wrestling with for months. Freyja watches this unfoldment with the satisfied expression of a teacher who has seen a student grasp something fundamental. She doesn't ask the young woman to explain what she's seeing. That would break the delicate state of receptive awareness that makes Sessrúmnir possible. Instead, she simply nods encouragingly and allows the lesson to continue at its own natural pace, understanding that each person's relationship with this form of magic develops according to its own timing and rhythm. The afternoon progresses slowly and peacefully, with periods of quiet practice alternating with gentle discussion of what people are experiencing. Freyja shares stories from her own learning, describing the years of patient observation that taught her to distinguish between genuine insights and wishful thinking, between patterns that truly exist in the world and patterns that exist only in her own hopes or fears. She emphasizes that Sessrúmnir is not about predicting the future in any dramatic sense, but about understanding the present moment more deeply and completely. The practice of Sessrúmnir, you begin to understand, is fundamentally about developing a different relationship with time and attention. Where most magical practices seek to impose the practitioner's will upon the world, Sessrúmnir invites the world to reveal its own patterns and possibilities. It requires the kind of patient receptivity that our busy lives rarely encourage, the willingness to sit quietly with questions rather than rushing toward answers, the understanding that some forms of knowledge can only emerge in the spaces between thoughts rather than through direct intellectual effort. As the lesson continues, you notice how the quality of light in the room seems to shift and deepen, not because the sun is moving, but because your own perception has become more refined and sensitive. Colors seem richer, textures more pronounced, the relationships between objects more vivid and meaningful. It's as if practicing Sessrúmnir has awakened parts of your awareness that usually remain dormant, allowing you to see beauty and significance in details that you would normally overlook or dismiss as unimportant. Freyja demonstrates advanced techniques by reading the patterns in a bowl of water, watching how dust motes move in sunbeams, or simply observing the way shadows fall across the floor. Each of these simple observations becomes a gateway to understanding larger patterns, the way communities form and dissolve, how relationships develop over time, the subtle currents of change that move through all aspects of life. She shows how the same principles that govern the movement of water also shape the flow of human emotions, how the patterns that appear in flames mirror the processes of growth and transformation that occur in all living things. The magic of Sessrúmnir, you realize, is not separate from daily life but woven throughout it. Every conversation contains patterns that reveal the deeper relationships between people. Every garden shows the principles of growth, cooperation, and natural timing. Every meal preparation demonstrates the art of combining different elements to create something more nourishing and satisfying than any individual ingredient could provide alone. The practice of Sessrúmnir simply teaches you to see these ordinary miracles more clearly and understand their implications more deeply. As the afternoon draws toward evening, Freyja gathers her students for a final demonstration. She arranges a new collection of objects, stones, shells, pieces of bark, dried herbs, but this time she invites everyone to participate in the arrangement, each person adding one item and positioning it according to their own intuitive sense of where it belongs. The resulting assemblage is more complex and beautiful than anything any individual could have created alone, a visual representation of how different perspectives and insights can complement each other when brought together with care and respect. Looking at this collaborative creation, you understand something important about the nature of wisdom itself. Like the practice of Sessrúmnir, true understanding emerges not from any single source, but from the patient weaving together of many different threads of insight and experience. The young woman who struggled and then broke through to understanding, the experienced practitioners who shared their knowledge, the natural objects that served as focal points for contemplation. All of these elements contributed to a learning experience that was richer and more complete than any individual component could have provided. As you prepare to leave Freyja's study, carrying with you a new appreciation for the subtle art of seeing beneath surfaces, you find yourself wondering about the broader applications of this gentle approach to understanding. Perhaps there are connections between the way Sessrúmnir reveals hidden patterns and the way that different goddesses might work together to share the complex responsibilities of caring for fallen warriors. After all, if wisdom emerges from the careful combination of different perspectives, wouldn't the same principle apply to the division of sacred duties? Following your contemplation of how different perspectives can combine to create deeper understanding, you find yourself curious about one of the most practical examples of such cooperation in the Norse cosmos: the way Freyja and Frigg, wife of Odin, worked together to divide the fallen warriors between their respective halls. This arrangement wasn't born from conflict or competition, but from the recognition that different kinds of souls needed different kinds of rest, and that no single approach to honoring the dead could serve everyone's needs. Frigg arrives first, carrying a leather portfolio filled with carefully organized records. She moves with the quiet efficiency of someone who has spent centuries managing complex responsibilities, her demeanor reflecting the practical wisdom that comes from being both a goddess and a wife, someone who understands the importance of maintaining harmony in relationships while ensuring that necessary work gets done properly. She settles into her chair and begins reviewing her notes, preparing for what has become a familiar but never routine discussion. You discover yourself in a quiet meeting chamber in Asgard, where the two goddesses gather monthly to review the reports from the Valkyries and ensure that their system of division continues to serve both justice and compassion. The room is simple and comfortable, with two chairs positioned near a window that looks out over the training grounds where some of Valhalla's warriors practice their eternal combat, while in the distance you can see the peaceful gardens that surround Sessrúmnir. When they turn to the formal business at hand, their discussion reveals the thoughtful complexity of their arrangement. The traditional understanding is that Odin receives half of the fallen warriors for Valhalla, while Freyja receives the other half for Sessrúmnir. But the reality is more nuanced and more interesting than this simple division suggests. Rather than splitting the fallen randomly, or according to rigid categories, the two goddesses consider each case individually, discussing where each soul would be most comfortable and could best continue their spiritual development. Their conversation begins, as it always does, with personal inquiries about each other's families and responsibilities. Frigg asks about the latest group of warriors who have arrived at Sessrúmnir, while Freyja inquires about Odin's recent travels and the various projects he has undertaken. These aren't mere pleasantries, but genuine expressions of care and interest that reflect the deep mutual respect that has developed between them over the centuries of their collaboration. Freyja enters a few minutes later, bringing with her the scent of spring flowers and the subtle aura of warmth that seems to follow her everywhere. She carries her own set of records, though hers are kept in a beautifully carved wooden box rather than a practical folder. The difference in their organizational styles reflects their different approaches to the same fundamental concern, ensuring that every fallen warrior receives the kind of afterlife that will best serve their continuing development and healing. The discussion proceeds slowly and thoughtfully, with both goddesses bringing their different perspectives to bear on each case. Frigg, with her deep understanding of family dynamics and social structures, often identifies warriors who need the clear boundaries and shared purpose that Valhalla provides. Freyja, with her appreciation for individual growth and creative expression, frequently recognizes souls who would benefit from Sessrúmnir's more personalized approach to healing and development. Frigg opens her portfolio and begins describing the warriors who have been tentatively assigned to Valhalla. These tend to be people who thrived in structured environments, who found meaning in clear hierarchies and well-defined goals, who drew strength from the camaraderie of organized military life. Many are professional soldiers who chose warfare as their calling rather than having it thrust upon them by circumstances. They appreciate the discipline and routine of Valhalla's endless training, finding peace in the familiar rhythms of military life extended into eternity. Freyja listens carefully to each description, occasionally asking questions or suggesting modifications based on her own understanding of what different personalities need for healing and growth. When Frigg describes a warrior who was known for his fierce loyalty to his comrades, but who also showed exceptional gentleness with children and animals, Freyja suggests that such a person might be better served by the more flexible environment of Sessrúmnir, where he could explore both aspects of his nature without feeling pressure to maintain a consistent warrior identity. Sometimes their discussion reveals cases where the initial assignment needs to be reconsidered. A warrior who seemed destined for Valhalla because of his impressive combat record might actually be better suited to Sessrúmnir if his fighting was motivated primarily by a desire to protect the innocent, rather than by a love of battle itself. Conversely, someone who died defending their home might actually thrive in Valhalla's communal environment if they had always dreamed of being part of a great military fellowship, but never had the opportunity during their mortal life. What strikes you most about their collaboration is how naturally they complement each other's strengths while compensating for each other's blind spots. Frigg's systematic approach ensures that no case is overlooked or inadequately considered, while Freyja's intuitive insights often reveal hidden aspects of personality that might not be apparent from purely factual records. Neither goddess tries to dominate the decision-making process or claim superior wisdom. Instead, they work together with the easy cooperation of experienced partners who trust each other's judgment and value each other's contributions. The afternoon progresses with discussions of particularly complex cases, warriors whose motivations were mixed, whose lives showed both admirable and questionable choices, whose personalities combined seemingly contradictory elements. These borderline cases require the most careful consideration, as they represent people who might flourish in either hall depending on how their placement is handled and what kind of support they receive during their transition to the afterlife. Eventually they reach a decision that reflects the creativity and flexibility of their partnership. The shield maiden will begin her afterlife in Sessrúmnir, where she can receive the gentle healing and individual attention that her emotional wounds require. But after she has had time to process her trauma and develop greater self-confidence, she will have the option to transfer to Valhalla if she finds that she misses the structure and fellowship of military life. This solution honors both her warrior identity and her need for healing, allowing her to find her own path to peace and fulfillment. One such case involves a shield maiden who fought with exceptional courage, but who also struggled throughout her life with periods of deep sadness and self-doubt. Frigg initially suggests Valhalla, thinking that the structured environment and clear expectations might provide the stability this warrior needs. But Freyja points out that someone who battled internal demons as well as external enemies might benefit more from Sessrúmnir's gentler approach to healing, where she could address her emotional wounds without feeling pressure to maintain a facade of constant strength. Their discussion of this case reveals the depth of their understanding about how different environments affect healing and growth. They consider not just the warrior's obvious strengths and accomplishments, but also her hidden vulnerabilities and unmet needs. They think about how she might react to different types of community, what kinds of activities might help her continue developing, and which approach to honoring her sacrifice would most truly serve her ultimate well-being. As their meeting draws toward its conclusion, both goddesses take time to review the overall patterns they've observed in recent assignments. Are they seeing more warriors who need healing-focused approaches, or more who would benefit from structured military environments? Are there changes in mortal societies that affect the kinds of people who become warriors? And should their selection criteria evolve to reflect these changes? These broader questions ensure that their system continues to serve its intended purpose as the world itself changes and develops. The final item on their agenda is always a review of feedback from the halls themselves. Warriors, who have been in their respective afterlives for several years, sometimes request transfers if they discover that their initial placement wasn't optimal for their continued growth. Both goddesses treat these requests seriously, seeing them not as failures of their decision-making process, but as natural results of personal development that continues even after death. As Frigg closes her portfolio and Freyja secures her wooden box, their conversation shifts back to personal topics. They discuss upcoming festivals that will require coordination between their halls, share news about mutual friends among the gods, and make tentative plans for their next meeting. Their easy friendship is evident in these casual exchanges, a reminder that their professional collaboration is built on a foundation of genuine mutual respect and affection. Standing to leave, both goddesses pause for a moment at the window, looking out over the landscapes that represent their different approaches to honoring the fallen. Valhalla's training grounds buzz with activity, while Sessrúmnir's gardens show the quiet beauty of contemplative growth. Neither tries to claim that her approach is superior. Instead, they simply appreciate how their different methods serve the varied needs of those in their care. As you watch them part with warm farewells and promises to stay in touch, you're struck by how their partnership embodies the same principles that govern the practice of Seitha, the understanding that wisdom emerges from combining different perspectives, that complex problems require nuanced solutions, and that the most effective approaches often arise from patient collaboration rather than individual brilliance. Their monthly meetings might seem routine, but they represent an ongoing commitment to justice, compassion, and the careful stewardship of souls who have earned eternal rest through their sacrifice. Walking away from their meeting chamber, you find yourself reflecting on how this cooperative approach to divine responsibility might relate to other forms of partnership and harmony in the Norse cosmos. Perhaps the same principles that guide Frigg and Freyja's collaboration also shape the way other beings work together to create beauty and maintain balance. You think of stories about creatures who bridge different worlds, who transform between forms, who carry messages of peace and connection across vast distances. You find yourself beside a remote mountain lake, just as dawn is breaking, the water so still and clear that it perfectly mirrors the sky above. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the subtle fragrance of water lilies that bloom along the shoreline. This is one of those places that feels separate from ordinary time, where the boundary between the mythic past and the eternal present seems thin enough to step through without effort. Your thoughts of partnership and transformation naturally draw you toward one of the most beautiful and mysterious aspects of Norse mythology, the Swan Maidens, beings who exist at the boundary between human and divine, earth and sky, individual identity and collective harmony. These are not the dramatic shapeshifters of adventure stories, but rather gentle souls who embody the quiet magic of transition, the peaceful beauty of lives lived in rhythm with natural cycles, and the profound connections that can exist between different forms of consciousness. At first, the lake appears empty, except for the usual wildlife, a few ducks paddling near the reeds, a heron standing motionless in the shallows, the occasional ripple that suggests fish moving beneath the surface. But as you watch more carefully, you begin to notice something unusual about some of the white shapes floating in the center of the lake. These swans move with a grace and intelligence that seems different from ordinary birds, their positioning relative to each other suggesting not just flocking behavior, but conscious choreography. The Swan Maidens begin their morning dance, and you realize you're witnessing something that few mortals ever see. Their movements on the water are perfectly synchronized, creating patterns that shift and flow like living mandalas. Sometimes they form perfect circles, other times spirals that expand and contract with mathematical precision. Occasionally they break into smaller groups that weave between each other in intricate figures that remind you of the complex knotwork patterns found in the finest Norse art. Their song continues throughout the dance, but you gradually understand that it's not simply music for its own sake. Each note seems to correspond to a specific movement, each harmony to a particular formation. They're not just singing and dancing, but engaged in some form of communication, or perhaps even magic that uses beauty itself as its medium. The patterns they create on the water's surface mirror the harmonies in their voices, while their voices seem to guide the perfect timing of their movements. As the sun rises higher and its light begins to dance across the water's surface, you hear the first notes of their song. It doesn't sound at all like the harsh honking you might expect from swans, but rather like voices harmonizing in tones so pure and clear that they seem to resonate with something deep inside your chest. The melody is simple but infinitely complex, familiar yet surprising, ancient yet timeless. Listening to it feels like remembering something you never knew you had forgotten. Then, in a moment so subtle you almost miss it, the transformation begins. One by one, the swans begin to rise from the water, but not in the way birds normally take flight. Instead, they seem to step upward through the air itself, their swan forms gradually becoming translucent, while other shapes begin to appear within them. The process is so gradual and gentle that it feels more like watching flowers bloom than witnessing magical shape-shifting. The dance builds slowly toward what you sense will be a moment of transformation. The Swan Maidens begin to move closer to shore, their formations becoming more compact and intense. Their song grows more complex, with individual voices weaving intricate countermelodies that somehow never clash or compete, but instead create an increasingly rich tapestry of sound. The very air around the lake seems to shimmer with anticipation, as if reality itself is preparing for something extraordinary. As you watch, transfixed by the elegance of their performance, you begin to notice subtle changes in the world around the lake. The morning mist lifts more gently than usual, creating soft spirals that echo the swans' movements. The flowers along the shoreline seem to open their petals in rhythm with the music, while the trees sway slightly despite the complete absence of wind. It's as if the Swan Maiden's song is awakening the natural world to deeper levels of beauty and harmony than normally exist. In their human-like forms, the Swan Maidens continue their dance, but now they move through the air above the lake rather than across its surface. Their formations become three-dimensional, creating shapes of stunning complexity and beauty that could never be achieved by earthbound dancers. They spiral around each other like DNA helixes, form interlocking rings that rotate at different speeds, and occasionally merge into single unified shapes, before separating again into individual dancers. Their song, too, evolves with their new form, adding harmonies and overtones that were impossible while they wore swan bodies. You hear not just their voices but the sound of wind through feathers that no longer exist, the whisper of water against wings that have become something else entirely, the gentle percussion of heartbeats that seem to echo across the lake's surface. The music becomes a complete environment, surrounding you with beauty so intense that tears begin to run down your cheeks without you quite understanding why. What emerges are beings of ethereal beauty, not quite human, not quite divine, but something that bridges both categories with perfect grace. They retain the pure white coloring of their swan forms, but now it appears as flowing garments that seem to be made of moonlight and mist. Their hair floats around them as if they were still moving through water, and their movements maintain the same liquid grace they showed as swans. Most remarkably, their song continues uninterrupted throughout the transformation, proving that their music comes from something deeper than merely physical vocal cords. As their aerial dance continues, you begin to understand something profound about the nature of transformation and identity. The swan maidens haven't abandoned their swan nature to become something else. Instead, they've revealed that swan and maiden are simply different expressions of the same essential being. Their beauty in human form contains all the grace of their swan movements, while their swan form contained all the intelligence and emotion of their human consciousness. The transformation isn't a change, but a revelation of complexity that was always present. Their song, too, shifts with their forms but never stops entirely. As swans, they sing with voices that seem to emerge from the water itself, deep and resonant, and somehow connected to the ancient songs that whales sing in the deepest oceans. As maidens, their voices become crystalline and clear, touching harmonies that seem to come from the space between stars. But underlying both forms is a constant musical thread that suggests their true essence exists in the realm of pure sound, pure harmony, pure beauty that transcends any single physical expression. The morning progresses with the swan maidens moving seamlessly between their two forms, sometimes spending long minutes as pure swans floating peacefully on the lake, other times soaring as ethereal beings through the air above. The transitions happen so naturally that you begin to lose track of which form is which, understanding instead that you're witnessing a single, continuous existence that simply expresses itself through different physical manifestations depending on the needs of the moment. As their song fades to a whisper, and they settle back into their swan forms for the day's activities, you realize that everything you've witnessed connects to all the other stories you've heard tonight. Like Freyja's patient work with craftsmen, the swan maiden's beauty emerges from dedicated practice and deep understanding. Like the Valkyries' aerial journeys, their movements through different realms require skill, wisdom, and respect for the territories they traverse. Like the cooperation between Frigg and Freyja, their harmonized singing demonstrates how individual voices can create something more beautiful together than any single voice could achieve alone. In this final moment of their morning ritual, you understand that you've been witnessing something far more significant than a simple magical display. The swan maidens embody principles that run throughout all Norse mythology. The understanding that beauty and function are inseparable, that different forms of existence can coexist within single beings, that the most profound truths are often expressed through art rather than words, and that transformation is not about becoming something new, but about revealing aspects of yourself that were always present, but perhaps hidden. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, you sense that the swan maiden's performance is drawing toward its conclusion. Their movements become more ritualized, their formations more ceremonial. They gather once again in the center of the lake, this time in a perfect circle that encompasses both their swan forms floating on the water and their maiden forms hovering just above the surface. Their song reaches a crescendo of indescribable beauty, every voice perfectly balanced with every other, creating harmonies so complex and pure that they seem to open doorways to other realms of existence. The Norse myths, understood in this gentle way, become not just entertainment, but invitations to recognize the mythic dimensions of our own lives. Every act of patient creation echoes Freyja's necklace. Every moment of cooperation mirrors the goddess's shared care for fallen warriors. Every experience of beauty, whether in art, nature, or human relationships, connects us to the same sources of wonder that inspired these ancient stories. Perhaps that's the deepest magic of all, the recognition that we are still living within the same cosmic patterns that gave rise to these tales of gods and heroes, swans and maidens, patience and transformation. The lake grows quiet as the swan maidens disperse to their daily activities, some remaining as swans to tend to the lake's ecosystem, others transforming back to their maiden forms to carry out responsibilities in other realms. But their song continues to echo in your memory. a reminder that beauty exists not just in dramatic moments of transformation, but in the quiet, daily practice of living with grace, attention, and harmony with the world around us. As you prepare to leave this magical place, you find yourself thinking about how these ancient stories speak to our modern lives. In our own busy world, we might not have swan maidens singing on mountain lakes, but we do have moments when beauty breaks through our routine concerns and reminds us of deeper harmonies. We have people in our lives who, like Freyja and Frigg, show us how cooperation can create solutions that serve everyone's needs. We have experiences of patient craftsmanship, whether we're learning new skills, raising children, or simply trying to live with kindness and attention. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might listen for echoes of the Swan Maiden's song in the quiet sounds around you, the whisper of wind through trees, the distant hum of traffic, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. You might remember that every day offers opportunities for the kind of patient attention that creates beauty, the generous cooperation that serves the greater good, and the recognition that transformation is always possible for those willing to listen carefully to the deeper harmonies that connect all things.